You know, whenever we start talking about housing, good morning to you, by the way, it's Andrew Castle here on LBC, 4 minutes past 8, Saturday morning, 3rd of February. Whenever we talk about housing, there's 1,000 different ideas, and with the possibility, the very real possibility of a full-on left-wing government with their own views on property, the old argument, property is theft, seems to be sort of moving through the that particular wing of the Labour Party. I wonder what the solutions are. There aren't. I mean, for me, supply and demand seems to be at the very top of the list. Of course, we've got people coming to this country. You can't blame all the pressure on housing on immigration, though, but certainly there's an element of that. We always get a few texts, so I can head those off at the past. But I can tell you, in 1977-78, when I was down in Somerset, they had council housing, and I lived in 2 council houses. And eventually my mum, because the marriage broke down, my mum and my dad, and Mum and Colin, who was to become her new husband, we got a council house, which wasn't in such a nice area. Then we got a new one. And I don't remember at the time anything other than pure joy when she had the chance to buy this council house. I think it was for £12,000. Upon the death of Colin, and Mum went some time ago, we sold it, I think, for £120,000 or so. So 12,000 to 120,000. I mean, it's not the greatest leap in the world in real terms, but it was like tenfold, and that was over a number of years. But I never really stopped to think, well, was that housing replaced? Because that's sort of key, isn't it? If it's not replaced, then you are going to have a pent-up demand. If something is taken off the market and not replaced, there's trouble. I mean, it was great news for her. My brother David lent her the money and it changed her life around. But the rapid loss of social housing, I read, because of right to buy, has been laid bare after new figures revealed more than 5 times more homes are being sold now than in 2012. And councils say right to buy had become unsustainable after it emerged that the sell-off of council homes has drastically accelerated in the past few years. Labour naturally have labelled the figures indefensible. So what are we talking about here? More than £3.5 billion of public money has gone to help 60,000 tenants buy their homes at a hefty discount in the past 6 years. And local councils are saying that this is a fire sale of low-cost homes. So let's find out more about this now with Sophie Barnes, Deputy News Editor at Inside Housing, to start with. I'll join Sonia Poulton in just a minute, who's a journalist and social commentator. Sophie, good morning.
Good morning.
So these people who are buying, these 60,000 tenants who have bought their home at this discount, I can't blame them, because if you have a chance to get onto the property ladder, it's still a pretty smart move, especially at a discount. What sort of a discount do you get if you buy the home you are in, and how long have you got to have been in it to have the right to buy?
Well, so the discount increased in 2012. So under David Cameron, he brought in an increased discount of around 100,000, I believe. £75,000. That was it.
A discount of £75,000 on a house worth what?
Well, that depended really. So it depended where you lived, but it was basically the maximum was £75,000. That was the discount that was brought in, yeah. And so. And generally that meant that obviously sales increased lots because lots more people were able to afford to buy their homes, and that seems to have kind of driven a kind of an even higher increase in what LGA are calling a social housing fire sale.
Mm. And how many council houses are there now? The stock is now low? I mean, and how long have you got to have been in a council house before you have the right to buy?
I believe it's generally 5 years, and the stock at the moment, I couldn't tell you the exact figure off the top of my head, but it definitely has diminished. It's gone down quite dramatically, and I think the issue is that the stock's diminishing because councils just aren't building. So last year, according to latest government figures, only around 1,500 homes were built by councils across the whole country. And so if you think about the amount of homes being sold through the right to buy and then the amount of homes being built by the councils, there's a huge discrepancy between those figures.
Yes. And how many of these homes sold under right to buy are then lived in by the person who has bought them, and how many, and presumably some people, are renting them out, taking an income and disappearing?
Well, that's a really interesting point to make, because actually a recent investigation that we carried out showed that 40% of those homes sold to Right to Buy are now being privately let out. So I think the issue with the policy that people have is that if, as a policy in itself, the idea of someone like your mum being able to buy her home and live in it and have her own home and it being her own place that she'd be proud of is great. But the critics say, well, actually, that's not necessarily happening in all cases. 40% of these homes are being rented out, often at much higher rents into the private rented sector. And that means that if they're not being replaced, then the policy aim isn't being met, and also people aren't being able to access the home in the first place.
Well, OK, Sophie, thank you. I'll be back to you in a second. Sonia Poulton is a journalist and social commentator. People living in their own homes, absolutely fantastic. But nearly half of people are buying at a discount and moving out. It doesn't seem right at all, to be honest, Sonia. What do you think? Morning.
Oh, Andrew, I totally agree with you. Good morning. Good morning to Sophie as well. I mean, look, I completely understand what you were saying at the beginning. Having been born and raised in a council house myself,
oh, yeah.
When it was introduced, it was really considered as something like, wow, this is so aspirational, upwardly mobile. I understand, it was an amazing buzz when it happened at the time, although we didn't buy our council home. But a lot of people around us did. And so at the time, obviously, it seemed amazing. But the fact is, and Sophie's absolutely right, a lot of those council homes are being let out privately. And not only that, quite scandalously. But one of the beneficiaries of the right to buy is Charles Gower, a former MP whose father actually presided over the original, in Thatcher's government, over the original right to buy. And Charles Gower at one stage owned 40 ex-council flats in South London. So that's one example. It is a vicious circle.
How can he have done that, Sonia? Now, he's not here to defend himself if he's in fact coming under attack, because I'm sure anything that he's done is not illegal.
It's in the public domain, Andrew.
Right.
You only have to Google it online. The Daily Mirror covered it before. It's in the public domain. It's a well-known fact. But actually it's not a well-known fact, because lots of people are always quite shocked when I say that fact. But that's one example of it. But the truth is that that housing stock was never, ever replenished. Every subsequent government has failed. There's no doubt about it. Social housing should never, ever be sold. And you know what? It's completely wrong, because what we've done is we've encouraged people to buy their homes, and then we've forced them to sell them to take care of their social care later in life. So it's completely wrong. It was really a setup from the get-go, as far as I can see now. And we've just failed people.
And Sophie, I'm just looking at some of the numbers here. Right to buy, and we've talked about the £75,000 increasing to £100,000 in some parts of the country as a discount. I don't know how much this has really contributed to the housing crisis, certainly in personal circumstances and individual cases, I can imagine so. But the number of homes sold off has gone from 2,600 in 2011-12 to 13,400 in 2016-17. I mean, we're only really just scratching the surface of the housing crisis that we've got. So let's try to push this on and find one or two solutions for this. Everything from building on what they now call low-performing greenbelt land to potentially brownfield sites. What is the answer?
Well, I think the thing is that, yes, it's small numbers in terms of if you look at just Right to Buy, but the way that the housing market works is it's a kind of a knock-on chain effect. So if you have, high prices in, say, kind of the home ownership market, when people are trying to find a home to buy, then it's much as likely they can move out of a council home if they can afford it, and then move up the chain, and then someone can move into their old council home who's homeless or is, kind of needing kind of more permanent accommodation. So the issue there is that it's kind of, at the moment, the chain is kind of broken, and without councils being able to build lots of homes themselves, then the most vulnerable people are the ones that are struggling the most in that sense.
Yes.
And I think maybe, the thing was that there's a lot of debate about Greenbelt. The Conservative government are very, very generally very keen not to build on Greenbelt, and that's been a very kind of typically Conservative policy for many years.
Mind you, they are dictating to local authorities now and saying if you don't make a plan to perhaps identify what they call low-performing greenbelt land and start telling us how you're going to house people, then we'll make those plans for you. That's got the attention of local authorities.
It has, certainly, yeah. And that's also quite interesting from the Conservative government because it's quite interventionist. And as we know, they tend to try and say, we'll leave people to it. But, I think the government have realised that the housing crisis has got to the point where if they don't do anything about it, or they don't seem to be doing anything about it, then they're in real trouble politically. And obviously Theresa May said it's her, her personal mission to fix the housing crisis. She did come into some flack this week, actually, because in the Times, because she locally in her constituency had blocked a development after saying, the housing crisis is my personal mission. So, yeah, it's interesting there.
All right. Well, Sophie, thank you very much indeed. A last word, Sonia. I'd like you to comment on this. I believe in going up as well as out, and there's no point building 2 hours away from where people want to work. Young people, particularly trying to get on the housing ladder, they need to be, and they don't want to give away 4 hours of their day to commute. I mean, we should be going up, I swear.
When you say going up, you're talking like high rise, aren't you?
I am.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't have a problem with that. But what I would say was that there is plenty of houses and old properties that can be regenerated, and what we should, and you're absolutely right, we do need to be able to have social housing properties where people are working, and that includes in London. And we have to be careful about what's happening in London, obviously, because some of the regeneration is not working in the favour of people who need social housing. And so we really need to look at it, but we have to know that there is not the political will to build social housing, Andrew, because at this moment in time, a third of private landlords are MPs. That can also be looked up, and they benefit greatly from the top-up that comes from housing benefit and the overinflated prices. So the political will is not there. We need to look at why it isn't.
But you've got to let developers make a profit or they won't build, and building houses is what they do. Local authorities do not do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely understand what you mean. There is profit to be made in making profit.
You accept that? You accept that developers are going to make some profit?
Of course, it's a business. Why not? There's no. I don't have a problem with people making a profit. What I have a problem with is us actually saying that we don't understand why we've got a housing shortage. I'm not talking about you and I. I'm talking about the politicians. They know full well why we have a housing shortage, and that is because they have neglected it for 3 decades at least.
Yeah, and we've got tons of people coming here. The population of London since 2012 has gone up.
It isn't just immigration.
No.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But again, in London, we are outpricing people. We're not allowing people who need to work in London to be able to afford to live in London.
I quite agree. Essential services, particularly. Sonia Poulton, journalist, social commentator. Sophie Barnes, deputy news editor, Inside Housing. Thank you both very much indeed for that.